Welcome to the Quarter Life Lessons Podcast,
a show on the many relatable lessons learned to and through the journey of adulthood. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm CharLea. Let's get started. Today we're discussing perfectionism, what it is, and a few mindset changes to grow through perfectionism. Steph, how would you describe something that is perfect?
It's such a challenging question. Obviously, you want to think nothing's perfect, right? And just off the bat recognize that perfection isn't a thing. But the subconscious, I think, still tries to seek perfection, be perfect, not make mistakes. So I think, how would I describe something that's perfect? Is something ambitious?
Okay. Yeah, I could say that ambition is a part of the perfectionism definition. It's funny because we often place unrealistic expectations on ourselves. Like, the fact that we can't even really describe perfectionism says a lot. I definitely struggle with perfectionism, and ironically, it took me a very long time to write this episode and call it ready because I was so worried about it not being perfect. And I mean, that's just a little bit of my own struggles that I've had dealing with perfectionism overall.
So, CharLea, what would you say, how do you define perfectionism?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say I have an official definition for it, but through some research on Psychology Today, they define perfectionism as an abstraction and impossibility in reality. Makes sense on why we couldn't describe it.
Right.
Perfectionism can be dangerous, and the article reads that when taken too far, striving for perfection can lead to negative outcomes like procrastination, a tendency to avoid challenges, rigid or all or nothing thinking, and toxic comparisons, as well as a lack of creativity.
Oh my gosh. I have heard about all of those outcomes or all of those kind of states of thought or thinking errors, some might call them. Never have I tied them to perfectionism. I think maybe a little self-worth, but I would imagine that perfectionism and self-worth work are also very closely tied.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, or not that I think, I know that striving for such an ambitious goal, like there's got to be something within you that's trying to prove something different about you, which we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, it's interesting. How do you think it's possible that the attempt to be flawless can cause so many more problems to arise?
That's a great question, Steph. And often, I feel like when doing things for others, I feel like I go out of my way to my own detriment, to my own time and my own energy. And then I'm upset that it's not reciprocated. But I had to learn that being perfect is not required in order to show up for people. Even for showing up for myself and to show care for others, being perfect actually makes it less productive in general because the pressure and the rigidity is so heavy.
Gosh, that makes a lot of sense when you think about wanting to do something for the merit of it or for the outcome or to show someone you care and it's important to you. But then think about all the work it takes to do something perfect. And it doesn't become about the outcome or the care anymore. It becomes about what you're proving, like you said before. The productivity comes from, or doesn't come from, a different place in your heart.
Right.
And so it's not about caring for the person anymore.
Right, not at all. It's definitely like if I had to describe it, kind of like an act, like putting on a presentation.
Yeah, it's like if there were bank accounts, let's just say buckets, underneath every motivation, and someone was motivated to really make somebody's day because you love and care for them. That's like a direct one-to-one. But if your perfectionism comes in and kind of steals the source of that energy and puts it over into your I need credit bucket, or I need self-worth, and I'm going to do this to make myself feel good, it's not coming from a place to care about them anymore. It's coming from a different place.
Right. It's using other people.
That's fascinating.
It's using other people. It's manipulative at some points because you have a specific goal in mind that you want to get from them. Right. And of course, perfectionism can be placed on a bunch of different scenarios, but definitely if you're trying to be perfect to get a specific outcome from someone else, I think that is at the least a manipulation tactic.
That you may not even be aware of.
Exactly.
Because you think I'm being perfect, and maybe you think you're seeking love, but you also think you're giving love.
Yeah.
And you really have to be self-critical or think through, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why does the outcome of not being reciprocated hurt so much? Mm-hmm. Am I doing this for the right reasons? And there's probably some other things in there in addition to perfectionism, but I wonder if it's like just a signal to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes some self-reflection to remember that it could even be a thing that's happening, but it would be worth taking a look at.
Yeah. Okay, so clearly we know logically that no one is actually perfect. So why is this a common goal? Why do you think we strive for this unattainable goal?
There's probably a multitude of reasons why perfectionism is a common issue for a lot of people, but again, when reading Psychology Today, the article had mentioned that perfectionism can be driven by fear of failure, feelings of unworthiness, low self-esteem, and adverse childhood experiences. It's also frequently accompanied by depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, and even suicidal impulses.
Wow.
Yeah, so just like we were saying earlier, it comes from somewhere. It's not likely that we would even put a goal in front of us that we can't reach unless there was some external drive to get to something that's perfect.
Yeah, almost like it's really, when you think about perfectionism, it is a thinking error.
Right.
Like we talked about those before, just limiting beliefs or, poor communication, like all or nothing thinking. Perfectionism is not the same as those, but it's right in line. Mm-hmm. It's a frame of thinking or a mindset that is going to set you up for failure.
Absolutely. Stephanie, would you agree that our culture and society may have something to do with perfectionism being a common goal?
Oh, I for sure think that pop culture and things like that, gender roles, body image issues, achievement. I've been thinking in my own life about just this duty or this need to overachieve and prove, be productive. I think it's all a part of our culture. You can be wrapped up in that and not see it for what it is. But I think when you step back and ask yourself, why do I do what I do? Why do I think what I think or feel what I feel? And you start to dismantle some of it. I totally think that's why people can probably stay so subjugated or, oppressed by perfectionism for so long, is because it's built into our institutions.
Yeah.
It's built into getting a job. It's built into finding a partner. And everyone's afraid to make mistakes. And I think that's, when you think about, I don't want to make a mistake, I think the converse of that is I want to be perfect. Mm-hmm. I want to do the right thing. So there's very little space in that dichotomy in your mind.
Yeah.
But I think you have to make the space, and you have to make it for yourself and give yourself the space for the in-between. And if we're doing it right, we're making that space for other people. Mm-hmm. And letting them know it's okay to not be perfect, or it's okay to try something new. It's also okay to make a mistake.
Yeah. You make a good point with it being built into how our society just naturally operates. I mean, we just have the example of production and social media in general. We're often exposed to things that are very close to perfect daily, and we don't see the hundreds of thousands of pictures it took to get the one shot that was posted. We don't see all the editing that occurred after that one shot was taken. And I think we are often fed what we desire and what we see and value. And because it's in such a near perfect manner, I think that alters our goals and it alters the standard. And it's great for standards to be high, but often I feel like they become too high and too unrealistic.
I guess the other thing is, what's the motivation for the standard?
Mm-hmm.
And asking yourself, why do I feel this way?
Yeah.
And really taking account and being able to change the standard or change the desire or the achievement. And then I know that's not the topic of today's episode, but being grateful for wherever you are on the spectrum of perfect, for whatever that standard is.
I love that you said perfection is more of a spectrum. It gives space for things to be. It allows them to exist the way that they are, regardless of how high or low on the spectrum that it is. It just is.
I really like that you picked up on that concept of the spectrum. I think as I've grown as a human, I've started to understand that things are not black and white, that there's so much gray, and that embracing the concept of a feeling or a place as a spectrum helps me kind of find myself and ground myself. And so, yeah, if you're wanting perfect, let's just say that, because that's the topic of the episode, if you're wanting to build a perfect life, you're going to have to recognize where you are on the spectrum to getting to that perfect. But you could also change your mindset and not look for perfect, and maybe center it in gratitude or center it in fulfillment or something else. But I still think it would be a spectrum, whatever the construct that you put forth for yourself.
How adaptable can you be if everything in your life needs to be perfect? Perfectionism or having the perfect condition can be an excuse to avoiding something. And what is the thing that you keep pushing off? Is it because the conditions are not perfect? Are you being unrealistic with those conditions? This can cause years of stagnant behavior. And again, it opposes productivity. So I'll pose that question to you, Steph. How adaptable can you be if everything needs to be perfect?
Yeah, I don't think you can. If your adaptability is flexibility, it's acceptance and balance. And I don't think you can shift as well when you are aiming at perfect.
Right.
The aim for perfect is there's such small margins in any aim for perfection that the ability to adjust and shift and balance and be present in wherever you are is non-existent. And I love what you said a minute ago about the construct or the thought of perfection stalls productivity. I think that's so true. And then whatever feelings you have about not being productive at all usually don't help you get to perfect.
Right.
So if you can let the perfect aim go, and I'm not saying settle or get rid of your standards like you said before, but just recognize the degree to which you are aiming for something and where you are in that process, I think that's motivational.
You're absolutely 100% right, especially on the point you made about standards, because I know I'm a high maintenance girly and I require a lot, and I do have high expectations of myself and others, but I don't excuse the effort that needs to be put in, or I won't tolerate my needs not being met, whether that's for myself or that's from others. But there is a general understanding that nobody's going to be able to do it perfectly. Even I'm not going to be able to do it perfectly. And that has to be okay. There has to be balance. And it's important that I can be humble enough to check when I'm being unrealistic.
Yeah, I think, what is it called? Limerence or romanticizing or intellectualizing something that's perfect is so easy to do. It's imaginative, right?
Right.
It's when that unattainable, imaginative, really romantic idea of a career, a person, a life stalls you out,
Yeah.
that it's no longer productive. And you have to be humble and self-aware enough to ask yourself the difficult questions. And we're, borderline touching on self-love and self-worth as well, because like we talked about before, perfectionism probably is introduced to us as a way to earn love.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that maybe comes from childhood or something like that, or some sort of trauma in your life. But loving yourself enough to not be perfect or ask yourself difficult questions, that's what's necessary to get out of perfectionism, to see it for the kind of, trap that it is.
Yeah.
And so there may be some pre-work to do, on yourself before you can bust out of it and be aware enough to see perfectionism for what it is.
The overall lesson here is one that we have shared several times. It's one of the main bases of us even creating this podcast, and it's that I'm allowed to be a beginner and I am allowed to improve. And being proficient and up to par is not equivalent with being perfect. Don't let your brain trick you into thinking that.
Exactly. I think that's so powerful. We want to have genuine emotion, genuine thought, all this authenticity. But sometimes you have to remember that you get to control the thoughts that you have, and that those thoughts can support you or they can tear you down. And you really want to be cognizant of the thoughts you are feeding yourself to get out of the trap of perfectionism or something that's really not serving you.
This can be a little jarring, of course, to hear when all you wanted to do is, reach the high standards that you have set for yourself. It can be a little discouraging, honestly, to hear wanting to change that mindset. But think of it in a different sense. Let's say, for example, you're baking a cake. It's important to get the measurements right and the temperature, and all of that is well known. But it would be foolish of us to think that the conditions were absolutely perfect for every single edible cake that we've ever eaten. Actually, the more experience that I get with making a cake, the more knowledge and evidence I gain to know that if one or two things are slightly off, the overall outcome will still be great. At worst, the outcome is at least edible. There's nothing wrong with having an edible cake.
That's a really good point. And I think part of that mindset shift is that it's about the journey and the evidence and the experience. And you need to give yourself permission to gain all of that. And it's not always about the outcomes or outputs. It's about what you gained along the way, which maybe sounds a bit cliche. It's about the journey, but I really think that it is.
Absolutely. How would you ever get the experience speaking to jobs who are making people have experience before getting the job if you don't have the opportunity to gain the experience?
Exactly. And how do you know that's what you want?
Right.
The perfectionism piece gets so laser focused, like I was talking about before, with the aim being so small. If you stay in that frame of mind and you get to what you thought was perfect 5 years ago, you may not, the person you are 5 years later, that may not be what they want anymore.
I mean, yeah, 5 years, 5 days later,
Right.
The rigidity takes away your choice.
Oh my gosh, that's really powerful.
As much as we've spoken about changing the mindset, creating change and the intensity of a standard is easier said than done. Why is it difficult to try to not be perfect?
I think we touched on it earlier when we said that it's about feeling worthy and feeling love, seeking love, approval, and worth. And again, the older that I get, the more that I experience, I learn that that is an individual game. That's an individual pursuit. And filling that bucket, we try to put a lot of things in that bucket that we think is filling the worth and filling the value. And I really think at the end of the day, that's something that you control.
It takes some authenticity to not be perfect. Being perfect all the time, like we said, it's not realistic, and there's some vulnerability that comes with that. It's the possibility of rejection and non-approval, and it's scary. The person who's wanting to be perfect all the time may not even really have the desire to be perfect. In all honesty, it's the fear of what not being perfect gets you. That's the main motivation for me to be perfect.
That is so profound. So perfectionism may be about seeming perfect to other people. And it's not because you're happy with yourself or you're proud of what you've done. It's because you were afraid of what would happen if you weren't perfect. And I think that is, if you're feeling that way, you owe it to yourself to unpack that and think about settling yourself, because again, I think it's about the self-work.
Yeah.
You're afraid of what if you're not perfect? Are you afraid of yourself if you're not perfect? Or is that some sort of external motivator? And what can you do to the self and for the self that changes the way you are seeking connection or validation from others to remove perfectionism from the equation?
Just to wrap things up, we've talked a lot about how the mindset is the main issue with perfectionism. So here are some adjustments to help. Of course, therapy. Most things can be helped with therapy.
Exactly. We agree.
Yes, we agree
this
with
message
that.
is approved.
On this show, we agree that most things can be helped with therapy. Additionally, trying something new and allowing yourself to improve upon it, like a hobby or anything like that, will give you opportunities to get that evidence that, no, I was not perfect when I started, but I grew. I learned these things and I'm getting better. The standard is still never to be perfect. For example, I started line dancing in January. I've always loved dancing and it's great, and it's difficult. By all means, still look crazy when I'm learning certain things and I'm doing completely opposite things, or I'm turned the whole opposite way than everybody else. And there is some fear there, and that's why I practice, but I don't let the fear stop me from going. I don't let the fear stop me from trying again.
Gosh, that's so powerful. Not only did you say that you're spending time thinking about the fear itself, but you're choosing to go past it anyway, to
Absolutely.
be vulnerable anyway. And I think you're so right about trying something new or challenging a thought, because the evidence that you build from challenging that thought is just so priceless. You look out at the world and you want things to be as you think that they are, and you have to try a couple of things in order to build the history.
Yes.
Build the tank a little bit. Find the evidence to see if to check your thoughts against your experience.
Yeah.
Experience shapes all of those things. I think the other thing that you can do, since we're talking about it, is check your internal judgments. Some of the things you assume that other people are thinking about you, maybe those are things you think about yourself or have been told in the past, and they're not really true, and that maybe you're anxiously putting those thoughts out there that someone else is feeling them, but they really aren't. Another thing you could do is make a friend and ask that friend, what they think of your, let's say, dancing or whatnot. Oftentimes, I think the people that I see in the world who are trying things, I'm just really drawn to them. And I appreciate their vulnerability and their sense of self-love, and that they're willing to try things that are new. And that's really interesting, and it's inspiring.
Yeah.
When you see people who love themselves enough to be bad at something new.
Absolutely. And again, you touched on a really good point, that those judgments especially if they're in your head, it's probably just coming from you. And the energy behind that is so draining. And people who are able to be present and just enjoying the time do not make time for judging other people. In fact, I think I spend more of my time correcting the judgments because I've had them for so long, they do still come up. Correcting the judgments about myself and other people and being able to get back to being present in the moment.
That's so beautiful too. It's like all connected. And, I think the times in my life when I've been the most judgmental of other people, it had a heck of a lot more to do with how I thought people were perceiving me. And again, to go back to the self-work, when you accept yourself, it is so much easier to accept the people around you.
A heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Third mindset shift is finding beauty in the journey as opposed to only finding beauty and satisfaction in the end product. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but Thrivers, you're honestly missing out on so many things if you're only looking at the end goal. I feel like I would often start and really get invested into a lot of different things, and then I finally get to the end and I was unhappy and unfulfilled, and it was because I never enjoyed the thing while I was doing it, and now it's over. You missed all of the experience and you missed all of being present because you were so focused on the future. And perfectionism ties into that because you're trying so hard to make the end result look so good that you never put in any energy into enjoying the journey.
Right. For me, I try to focus on gratitude.
Yeah.
As a very self-driven, I would say ambitious person who's always looking for the next accomplishment, and I know that's probably another episode, but the way I try to ground myself is by saying, checking my feelings and also seeking gratitude and saying it out loud to myself, because I think there's nothing like gratitude that reminds you of the present. There's nothing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, gratitude forces you to think about what you're most thankful for, and to do that you have to start where you are,
right,
and start to speak out these blessings or these things you're grateful for, and it always centers me in my presence.
As always, the conversation does not end here. We want to know your thoughts on these topics. Join us on Instagram at quarterlifepod to share your perspective and continue the conversations to thrive. Thank you for tuning in to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast. Find new episodes every month on Spotify, YouTube, and our Buzzsprout website.